The grand hall of the mansion glimmered under the afternoon sun, which streamed through enormous floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a warm golden glow over the polished marble floors. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, their prisms refracting light into tiny rainbows that danced across the ornate walls. The air was heavy with the faint scent of polished wood and expensive perfume, mingling with the soft murmur of well-dressed guests exchanging polite greetings and careful compliments. In the center of it all, on a raised pedestal draped with a velvet cloth, stood a portrait that seemed to demand attention. It was a painting of a young man, sharply dressed in a tailored suit that hinted at elegance and refinement. His eyes, however, carried a spark that no amount of formal attire could conceal. A spark of mischief, curiosity, and something deeper, something unspoken, as if the canvas had captured not just his appearance but the essence of his life. Guests gathered around the portrait, murmuring appreciatively, pointing out the detail of the brushwork, the subtle play of light on the subject's face, and the remarkable likeness to a man whose name had become known in circles of power and influence. Some whispered speculations about his achievements, his wealth, the rare combination of charm and intelligence that had earned him a prominent place in society. The hall felt alive with admiration, though tinged with a hint of envy. And yet, amidst all the grandeur, one figure moved almost unnoticed. An elderly woman, her uniform simple and slightly worn, clutched a mop and bucket as if they were extensions of her own hands, her back slightly bent from years of labor, her shoes scuffed from countless hours spent walking the corridors of the mansion she cleaned. Her gaze, however, was fixed on the portrait, and it was not admiration that glimmered in her eyes, but a mixture of disbelief and recognition. Her lips trembled as memories surged unbidden: narrow dormitory halls, the smell of disinfectant and old wooden floors, the laughter and tears of children who had no one else to call family. She could see it all in the young man before her. The boy she had once scolded for mischief, the boy she had quietly comforted after nights of nightmares, the boy whose small triumphs had made her heart swell with pride. The air seemed to thicken around her, and the murmuring of the guests faded to nothing as she stepped forward, her voice breaking the polite din with a sudden, piercing clarity. "Sir, this boy lived with me in the orphanage," she shouted, and the sound rang through the marble hall like a bell, cutting through the opulence, the small talk, and the carefully curated admiration. Conversations froze mid-word, glasses clinked softly as hands paused, and every eye turned toward the cleaning lady, trying to make sense of the truth in her words. Her arms shook as she gripped the mop, her knuckles white, but she did not retreat. She had waited years for this moment, a chance for the world to acknowledge that behind the wealth, the influence, and the carefully constructed life, there had been a boy, vulnerable, resilient, and profoundly human, whose story had begun in a small, overlooked orphanage where she had once been a quiet guardian of hope. The hall held its collective breath, the weight of her declaration hanging like a tangible presence, waiting to see the reaction of the man who had once been just a boy under her care. The grand hall remained suspended in silence after the cleaning lady's declaration, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The guests, who had been whispering about wealth and influence just moments before, now stared with a mix of curiosity, disbelief, and unease. The young man in the portrait, now standing before them in reality, not just as an image, felt the weight of her words press down on him. For a moment he was transported back to the cold, narrow hallways of the orphanage, where the floors were never clean, the walls were chipped and dull, and the faint sunlight rarely reached the rooms where children huddled together for warmth. He remembered the whispers of late-night fears, the quiet victories of stolen moments of happiness, the nights when he lay awake, listening to the world outside, wondering if he would ever escape. The cleaning lady's voice, once trembling, had grown firm as she continued to speak. She recounted the boy's daily struggles, the cleverness he had used to solve impossible problems, the kindness he had shown even when he had so little to give. She remembered the stubborn independence that had sometimes frustrated her, the way he had refused to be defined by his circumstances, the glimmer of ambition that she had glimpsed even in his smallest actions. She told stories of shared meals where scraps were divided with fairness, of the games they had invented to pass the long, lonely hours, of nights when he had cried quietly in the corner, and she had sat beside him, offering comfort without words. Every detail she shared painted a vivid picture of a childhood that no amount of wealth or education could erase. A past filled with both hardship and resilience, courage and quiet brilliance. The guests shifted uneasily, many exchanging glances that betrayed their growing fascination. They had seen the man in the portrait celebrated for his achievements, admired for his charisma and intelligence, but now they were confronted with the reality that behind that polished exterior was a history few could imagine. It was a life that had been forged in adversity, shaped by people who had nurtured him without recognition, molded by circumstances that demanded courage and ingenuity from someone who had barely stepped into adulthood. The cleaning lady spoke with a mixture of pride and sorrow, her eyes glistening as she recounted moments that had never been captured in photographs, never written in official records, moments that had defined the boy more than any education or inheritance could. The man himself remained quiet, absorbing every word. Each recollection, each description of his younger self, struck a chord deep within him, stirring emotions he had long buried beneath layers of ambition and social polish. The grandeur of the hall, the admiration of the guests, the sheen of his carefully constructed life, all of it seemed suddenly fragile in the presence of this raw, unvarnished truth. He realized, with a mixture of humility and gratitude, that the foundation of his success had been laid in those orphanage halls, shaped by the care of someone who had seen potential when the world had ignored him. Around them, the guests began to murmur softly, their curiosity turning into something more reflective. They listened as the cleaning lady painted a vivid portrait of the boy they thought they knew, revealing a depth of character that could not be achieved through wealth or status alone. In that moment, the young man in the portrait became more than an image of success. He became a testament to resilience, to the unseen hands that guide us, to the power of compassion and belief. The hall felt smaller somehow, more intimate, as if the stories of hardship and hope had woven an invisible thread connecting everyone present to a truth that was at once personal and universal. The man stepped forward cautiously, his polished shoes clicking softly against the marble floor, each step echoing through the grand hall like a heartbeat. The opulence around him, the glittering chandeliers, the gilded moldings, the murmuring guests felt distant, almost unreal, compared to the vivid memories now flooding his mind. He stopped just a few feet from the cleaning lady, whose hands still gripped the mop, knuckles white, her posture a mix of strength and vulnerability. He searched her face, looking for a trace of recognition, a flicker that confirmed that she remembered him as he remembered her, not as the wealthy, polished man before them, but as the small, scrappy boy who had clung to hope amid the cold walls of the orphanage. You remember me?" he asked quietly, almost a whisper. Yet in the hushed hall, his voice carried weight. The cleaning lady's eyes shone with unshed tears, and a gentle nod was her answer. She blinked rapidly as if trying to steady herself, and then her voice, once trembling, found strength. "I remember every scraped knee, every stolen piece of bread, every night you cried quietly so no one else would hear. You were clever and stubborn, and you never let the world see how much you hurt. I saw you when no one else did." Her words washed over him like a wave, stirring memories he had long buried. He swallowed hard, feeling an unfamiliar lump in his throat. The polished confidence he wore like armor melted away in the presence of someone who had known his truest self. The memories were overwhelming. The long, echoing halls of the orphanage, the smell of disinfectant and worn mattresses, the laughter of children huddled together for warmth, the quiet moments of solace she had offered without ever expecting gratitude. Each recollection carried a weight, a reminder of the boy he had been and the life he had fought to leave behind, even as it had shaped the man he had become. The guests, standing silently around them, could sense the gravity of the moment. Many had only seen the man's success, his polished appearance, and his carefully curated image. Now they witnessed a different side, one forged from hardship, shaped by unseen hands and nurtured by a woman whose care had gone unacknowledged by the world. Whispers rippled through the crowd, a mixture of curiosity and awe. They had admired him for his wealth and status, but here, in the raw presence of truth, admiration became something more profound. Respect for the journey that had brought him here. The man extended a hand, trembling slightly, and she placed hers in it, the warmth of her touch grounding him in a reality he had almost forgotten. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The mansion's grandeur faded, and he was transported back to the orphanage where life had been simpler, harder, but filled with the kind of humanity that no riches could replicate. He realized that despite all his accomplishments, it was this connection, the recognition of his past, the acknowledgement of his struggles, that mattered most. In that moment, the hall transformed. What had been a display of wealth and prestige became a space of vulnerability and authenticity. The man and the cleaning lady stood together, bridging two very different worlds, the world of privilege he now inhabited, and the world of survival and care that had given him the strength to reach it. Around them, the guests watched, captivated, as history, memory, and gratitude converged in a moment that no portrait, no ceremony, and no applause could ever truly capture. The man led the cleaning lady through the grand hall, his movements deliberate, yet unhurried, as if each step were a pilgrimage through memory and gratitude. The guests lingered at the edges, still murmuring, but the conversation had shifted from idle admiration to genuine curiosity, their attention caught by the unfolding intimacy between two people whose history defied the glamour of wealth. The man's voice, usually commanding in boardrooms and social gatherings, was now soft and reflective as he began to speak of the orphanage, of nights spent in crowded dormitories where warmth was scarce, and of the small victories that had kept him going. He described how he had learned early to navigate the harshness of life with ingenuity and resilience, how he had shared meals with children who had no family, and how the care of people like her, people whose work was often invisible, had shaped the foundation of his character. The cleaning lady listened closely, her eyes glistening with tears, remembering the boy who had once been mischievous, brave, and quietly determined. She could see the man before her not merely as a reflection of societal success, but as the boy she had nurtured, whose small acts of kindness and cleverness had left a mark on everyone around him. As he spoke, he recounted the lessons he had learned not from books or mentors of wealth, but from the orphanage itself, from the struggle, the camaraderie, the compassion that existed even in scarcity. He spoke of the moments of laughter shared over broken toys, of whispered secrets exchanged in the dormitory at night, of the courage it took to dream when the world had offered so little. The guests began to sense the depth of these experiences, realizing that behind the portrait and the polished exterior was a life forged in perseverance, humility, and human connection. The cleaning lady's voice joined his occasionally, filling, in details, painting images of a boy who had been clever beyond his years, who had shown empathy even when he had so little, who had dreamed fiercely even when those dreams seemed impossible. She recounted how he had once stood up for other children, how he had comforted those who were afraid, how his small acts of courage had often gone unnoticed, but not by her. With each word, the mansion seemed less a monument to wealth and more a backdrop for a reunion that transcended status and social expectation. The man's eyes, usually guarded, softened as he glanced at her, gratitude evident in every line of his face. "I wouldn't be here without you," he said quietly, his words carrying the weight of a lifetime of acknowledgement and respect. It was a truth that the guests could feel. The success, the opulence, the achievements were real, but they were built upon the foundations laid by unseen hands, by compassion given without expectation, by care that had never sought recognition. By the time they reached the edge of the hall, the air had shifted. The grandeur of the mansion no longer felt distant or cold. It was warmed by memory, by acknowledgement, and by the quiet recognition that the man before them was not only a symbol of success, but a living testament to resilience, care, and human connection. The cleaning lady smiled faintly, a mixture of pride and relief washing over her. Around them, the guests began to see the man differently, not as a figure of status, but as someone whose life had been shaped by struggle, nurtured by kindness, and propelled by determination. And in that realization, the mansion itself seemed transformed, echoing not with wealth alone, but with the timeless resonance of gratitude and shared humanity. By evening, the mansion's atmosphere had transformed completely. The golden light of the setting sun streamed through the vast windows, casting long, warm shadows across the polished floors. The guests, though still lingering at the edges, had grown quieter, giving space to something far more intimate than their usual fascination with wealth or status. The man gestured toward the cleaning lady, his voice gentle yet insistent. "Come with me," he said. "I want to show you something." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded, curiosity and cautious hope mingling in her expression. Together they moved through the mansion, a silent procession that left whispers in their wake. Their first stop was the library, a grand room lined with towering bookshelves that reached the ceiling, each filled with carefully chosen volumes. The man explained how he had filled it with books he had once dreamed of reading as a child, books that had been inaccessible to him in the orphanage. He told her that each book represented a world he had longed to enter, stories that had fueled his imagination and ambition when life seemed bleak. The cleaning lady ran her fingers along the spines, some worn, some pristine, and her eyes widened as she recognized the titles, remembering how he had once begged for even scraps of knowledge. It was not just a library, it was a monument to the boy he had been, now fully realized in the man he had become. Next they wandered into the gardens, vast and meticulously maintained, bursting with colors and life. Trees stretched toward the sky, their branches swaying gently in the evening breeze. Flowers bloomed in carefully arranged patterns, their fragrance filling the air. The man spoke of his desire to create a space that reminded him of freedom, of the rare moments in the orphanage when children had stolen away to play, to imagine, to dream. He showed her a small fountain in the center where water glimmered like liquid silver, and admitted that it had been inspired by the rare visits to the city parks, moments that had left an indelible mark on him as a child. She smiled softly, realizing that every choice, every detail was a tribute to a past that could never be erased. Finally, they entered the private study, where the man had collected artwork that resonated with the dreams he had once held silently. Paintings of distant landscapes, of people and places he had never seen in person, each piece a reflection of hope and aspiration. He explained that the collection was a reminder that life could be shaped not just by circumstance, but by vision, courage, and persistence. The cleaning lady nodded, tears welling in her eyes as she understood the depth of thought and gratitude embedded in every corner of the mansion. They paused in the center of the study, facing one another. The man took her hands in his, warmth flowing between them. "I wouldn't be here without you," he whispered again, this time with a finality that carried decades of unspoken acknowledgement. In that moment, the mansion felt less like a fortress of wealth and more like a bridge connecting two worlds, one of struggle and survival, one of triumph and recognition. The guests, observing from a respectful distance, began to understand that this reunion was more than a simple acknowledgement. It was a testament to resilience, compassion, and the enduring power of human connection. The evening faded into night, but the warmth of that shared history lingered, illuminating the mansion far more brightly than any chandelier ever could.